This is the beginning of my sophomore year of retirement. And it's pretty much the first thing I've done other than travel and read novels and talk to psychology grad students about the meaning of life. So it actually means a lot to me to at least have a chance to contribute in some small way, to be a player, even if a bit player in some capacity. So what are my expectations for talking here today? I'll tell you a quick story. Back in the 1990s, I was the general manager of the new media division of a kind of medium-sized Boston publishing company, and we did a bunch of CD-ROMs. One of them was called Small Business Startup. And, to help sales, we had a rebate, and not too many people send rebates back, maybe about 5%, but those that did come back, I called a lot of them up. And what I found out was that the people that bought it, by and large, were not people who were starting a small business. People who are starting a small business don't feel like they need CD-ROMs on it or just about anything. It's people who have been in a small business for a couple of years that do start to reach out for assistance. I never would have imagined this, but a significant number of people said to me something like, there are a lot of great ideas in the CD-ROM of yours. And so one of my start of the day routines is I just randomly select some place, I'll listen to it, and a lot of times that idea helps me. So that's more or less what I see myself doing here today. I'm going to throw out a lot of ideas. Some of them won't stick, maybe some of them will. And kind of like a Mel Brooks movie, worked out okay for him. I've been at this for about 8 weeks, since sometime in January. I kind of would throw a rough estimate, 20 hours a week I've been at it, 160 hours, 4 full working weeks, kind of thing. Let's just give you an idea of, what it took me anyway, or what it would take anybody to do this kind of thing. And what I mean by this is basically what they call in academics a lit review. And where that goes is in academics, before you do anything original, you're also supposed to read about everything that's ever been done related to that original thing so that you can place it in a context. You're supposed to think of yourself as part of an ongoing conversation, and before you describe your cool thing, you got to say where that is in the conversation. I didn't do a definitive lit review like someone would have to do before a dissertation or something like that. I sampled. What I primarily used was called the EBSCO Academic Search Premier. It has most of the scientific journals from all over the world, and the starting point, the search term that I started from, was obviously shared presence. I could get at this awesome EBSCO database because I've maintained a tie, a little bogus, but a tie to my former university that subscribes to it. So, here's what you get at here, lots and lots of scholarly research and publications. All right, so just, look at the number of journals here. And I could digress at this point and go off into a rant about how most of the world's knowledge is tied up behind paywalls in commercial EBSCO databases like this that I have to game the system in order to gain access to, whereas for most people, or me if I didn't have this access, each one of these journals would be about a $30 fee to be able to download it. Anyway, I'm not going to do that. I figured out my way, and it's just a travesty. A good lit search doesn't just list articles and say what the findings were. It kind of tells a story. It's actually a story of stories, because a good lit search presents each piece of research, as a story, as opposed to just like, here's what the result was. So that's what I tried to do. I tried to tell the story of each of the articles that I selected, and then I tried to put them together to tell a bigger story. I guess you'd say this is the rationale. Why do this? Number one, shared presence is the holy grail. It's called by different names and it's defined in slightly different ways, but it's actually more than just everybody wants it because it's so great. It's seen as the essential ingredient in a bunch of different fields, a bunch of different realms of human activity, different sets of applications, even though it's not very well understood. People know it when it's there. Everything seems to work right. I guess in my mind, rationale number two is this idea that every new medium can be an instrument of great things, liberation and engagement, or the opposite, oppression and isolation. And just to take an example, Socrates, who was really Plato, famously claimed that writing would eliminate close personal contact and make us all lose our power of memory. That's what he said. While at the same time, Plato was actually a private for-profit school administrator who used written down stuff in his academy. So I don't know what to make of that, but people will obviously say that VR is going to isolate us more, make us less human. I think this is possible, but not inevitable, and I think it hinges in part on getting shared presence right. This is the harder path. It's not crazy to go for it, the one that calls for more participation and less mere consumerism. But no one can do anything big in culture if it's not happening anyway. And fortunately, there's a lot of momentum in the direction of participation and involvement. All the platforms for writing to be published on, all the highly involving video games, the popularity of social interaction through social media. Really, what's going on is that the society has always been organized around a few producers and a lot of consumers, but this ratio is changing. It's decentralizing the means of production and distribution. That's what the internet is doing. And this is pretty important, I would say, for a VR venture focused on collaboration and participatory forms, because social presence is that way. It's active, it's participatory. It depends on users who want that kind of experience in the first place. So there is this huge research database, hundreds and hundreds of articles, really, from a lot of different directions. It's never been integrated, never been analyzed, and I didn't do it. What I did, as I said before, was I cherry-picked and I sort of did some categorization intuitively on the fly, which I'll be showing you. In fact, I'll show you right now. This is the kind of categorical scheme that emerged for me as I was going. I think that number is accurate. I did that at some point, 42. That could be up to 45 articles now, but this is roughly, how the breakdown goes from the research articles that I did select. I might also add that the really largest category there, healthcare, breaks down into a bunch of subcategories like mental health, or as it's increasingly called, behavioral health, as well as, sort of just general medicine, as well as rehab, which is a huge field in VR. But before I could get to how we know we are with someone else, I kind of want to do a little bit of background and review how we know anything, and that was fun. The common sense perspective is that our behavior emerges from these processes that take place in our brain. It's clear. This is me. My brain is in here. And when I went back to get a PhD in instructional technology in 1998, that was still the way most people, even people who thought long and hard about brains and cognition, thought about things. We were at the end of what people maybe call the information processing metaphor phase for cognition. We were thinking of our brains the way we thought of computers, and we were thinking of computers the way we thought of our brains, and there was this little iterative process going on for several decades. And we kind of thought that we had external hard drives and main core processors and special processing chips and stuff like that. And that's not entirely wrong. Just like Newton wasn't entirely wrong after Einstein discovered the relative universe, it was simply the case that Newton's perspective was more limited, which is what you would sort of say about the brain-only theory of cognition, because we don't see it that way anymore. Most cognitive researchers don't see it that way anymore. It's not that the idea of the brain being some really zippy analog computer cranking away on Bayesian equations doesn't hold up anymore. It's more like that's only part of the picture. It's more like the whole idea of where and how cognition happens has broadened, and the brain's just part of it. The body is part of this cognitive system, and this new approach is often called embodied cognition. I've heard those words for years, and they sounded cool, but I didn't quite really get it until I started up into this project for Pluto VR, and I started to realize why it's so crucial. Embodied cognition is about us, life, our species, you and me, solving the same problem that you're asking in VR. How do we most efficiently create a persistent and useful sense of a world for ourselves and share it with others? Is it by having one kind of centralized mainframe processor that represents everything and makes zillions of inferences to guide all of our behavior? Probably not. You'd want to distribute that work as much as possible for speed, overall efficiency, and some other reasons that we'll get to. We now see perception as enacted. It's established on the fly all the time, kind of a back and forth process, or as it's called, a sensoro. And data doesn't just pass through. It isn't just filtered. Input provokes focused probes. There's kind of an interaction and intelligence happening at the most basic sensory level, really distributing the cognition process. Sensation is passive. Perception is active. We as organisms interrogate the object or the stimulus with our senses, and we apprehend a lot of meaning right there within that stimulus. So here's a concrete example, really down to earth, really kind of doofy. You're walking and approaching a door. Your visual sense tells you this. So do you then do some sort of calculus in your brain and instruct the individual parts of your arm to swing into some determined action to open the door? No. Actually, what happens, best case, is that your senses cue this integrated arm motion with no cortical involvement. Your brain higher functions don't have to get involved in it. It's a sensory motor coupling that really offloads the task completely to the body. That's how it should go. I'm going to carry on with that example a little bit more. But you see the point. Embodied cognition is just more efficient. The way we make the so-called consensus reality that we operate in works under the same constraints as VR. You can't process every bit of info out there. It's too inefficient. So what do? You selectively process. What guides that selection? According to J.J. Gibson's ecological learning theory, and he's one of my heroes, intelligence means finding clues in the environment that give you some kind of an advantage. And that's, like I say, very, in really down-to-earth terms. I'll take the example of a baseball player. Okay, Buster Posey has always been able to hit a curveball. He sees something in the way the ball is released, in the spin of the ball, and the position of the pitcher's fingers or hand. He sees it approximately 1.2 seconds that he has before deciding if he's going to swing and where he should swing. He sees something that I wouldn't see. He sees a clue, a cue in the environment. He's getting cognitive help from the environment, and it goes right from that into a motor stimulation. Actually, Buster Posey doesn't really decide anything in this case. What Gibson would say is that the hitter, Buster Posey, is using an external resource to set up a well-trained perception-action coupling. Perception affects action, action affects perception. There's no need for further or higher brain involvement or making inferences. Just perceiving an affordance is enough to trigger a motor activity. Gibson's way of looking at it was that elements in the environment have affordances. It's functionality that they enable, and it's really contextual. This chair right here can afford sitting, but it can afford door stopping if I push it over there in front of the door. I could use it to hit someone over the head. I could put things on it like a shelf. The idea is to design so that the object broadcasts its function. To make life easier for people, you want to make affordances as clear as possible so no one has to waste processing energy on it. Okay, so to go back to the door, its main affordance is to close off and to be openable. And some doors demonstrate in their design how an approaching newcomer would access the affordance of openability. That's that best case that I was referring to, where it's so obvious that it's pre-reflective. The conscious mind never has to mull it. You could say that the designer is helped out by enabling users to offload a decision to the environment perceptual coupling. Donald Norman is a designer, and he wrote this wonderful book, The Design of Everyday Things, another one of my heroes. And he focuses on doors a lot because it resonates with everyone. It sure resonates with me. And so I was just Googling around, and here's a story that I found. Poorly designed doors, this isn't, everyone knows this isn't Wikipedia. Poorly designed doors are now called Norman doors because of the way he points out the failure to successfully broadcast an object's affordance. In any event, here's an example where it didn't work out right, and the person's description just makes this point perfectly. Here's how it goes. I have been conditioned to receive visual cues about doors my entire life. Handles get pulled, bars get pushed. No one had to teach me how to do this. It didn't require a manual to understand. It feels natural. So step into my shoes for a moment. I'm leaving Stewart Center and I'm headed to class. I have my longboard in hand. I got the 40-pound book bag on my back, probably some tunes playing in my ears. I'm thinking about my next class. Do I have any assignments to turn in? What will we be discussing? Do I have any text messages, emails? How's my hair? Norman Doord. The point is, he shouldn't have been thinking about the door. That should have just been handled. He should have been thinking about his next class. And VR guests should be also thinking about the task at hand, not how to open doors. Yeah, I could go farther. Yeah, bars have push, but where do you push? This one in the bottom here has an example of, showing which side of the bar you're supposed to push on. And so to keep attention away from just functioning in your VR environment, you want to make the affordances and how to access it obvious from the design, even avoiding text and icons because they require reflective processing. It's embodied in the design. Another concept that comes out of this embodied cognition view is the idea of invariance, which are patterns that stay constant over lots of situations. And an example that we just touched on was the push the bar or pull the handle. That's an invariant. I bring it up here because one of the best known invariants among people who study perception is the arrangement of a face. One of the reasons we're so good at picking faces out of backgrounds is because of the facial arrangement invariant. And if we violate it too much, and of course this is really important when we're talking about bots and embodied conversation agents and the way that we build our avatars, if we violate the facial arrangement invariant too much, then our faces acceptance problems. And when you're thinking about invariants and affordances, you got to kind of look beyond the obvious presentation and try to see what's the higher order pattern here. For instance, if you're walking through the woods and you get tired, there's a very good chance that without much conscious reflection, you will start going toward that stump and seeing it without thinking much as a thing to sit down on. In fact, the reason I'm sort of pushing this point is the idea that most processes, from opening doors to all sorts of automatic processes, work better when we don't have to think about it at all. And in fact, most normal automatic or unconscious activities get disrupted by our consciousness of it. And this, idea is probably best illustrated in the famous poem, The Centipede's Dilemma. The guy was doing great until some toad says, which leg moves after which. And then as the centipede started thinking about it, it just didn't work, couldn't even do it. So we're all familiar with this. A golfer thinking too closely about their swing, someone thinking too much about how they tie their tie or their shoelaces, they confine their performance of the task. We're going to make a step now up to the fact that other people are in the environment, but they're not just any old element. They're probably the major element of the environment. Our interactions there tend to be the most complex, and in fact it looks like the whole higher level cortical processing idea in our own brain evolution really started to take off beyond other species exactly at the time that we were as a species organizing into more complex social arrangements because of the agrarian revolution, the Neolithic revolution. That's when the cerebral cortex grew, I think obviously to accommodate the more complex inferences required for social interaction and cooperation. So that's why to have lots of other decisions, like where to push the door to open it, done somewhere else between my senses and the door, without involving my attention, because I have bigger fish to fry, people. By limiting what we have to deal with in our conscious mind, the attention-directed mind, we have more left for people. And that's really what this higher level brain is made for. And it's not just, rote interactions with the environment that become unconscious. Even a lot of our social interactions, social interaction process itself is unconscious. There are tons of ways that we lock in with each other without being aware of it at all. The autonomic entrainment, the kind of vestibular group swaying sync that happens, conversational rhythms that have been, studied for years. One intuitive way of reducing the complexity in interpersonal interactions is to diminish the range of possible behaviors. We progressively adapt to each other. And by doing this, limiting what we have to deal with, the conscious mind, the attention-directed mind, it has a reduced set of stuff to process. And it's more able to focus on what the other people are going to do, and to design my own anticipatory responses. Okay, I'm going to take one more step with this. I don't know if I'm kind of working it, but too much. But you know, it's not just that we get in sync with each other in ways that have the effect of reducing the set of what we need to focus on. We actually use heuristics to select a smaller subset of what's likely and what we need to process. This is actually how Deep Learn just won at Go, which was considered even more of a feat than winning at chess. It couldn't process every single possible outcome from every single possible position on the board and Go. That just can't be done. So what they did was they took a database of past games and expert moves in similar situations, and drew a subset at each move that could then be brute processed forward to see what the outcomes would be, and that's kind of what we do too. We don't simulate every possibility when we're making an inference about someone's behavior. We reduce the field using heuristics, a set of expectations about what we figure is the range of possibility from this person or this group or whatever it is. So reality wants exactly what VR developers need: a reduced set of stimuli and behavior options. Language is, of course, the main medium of explicit social interaction, and we see here lots of ways that this idea of interaction being made most efficient, least processing intensive, happens. We mimic each other when we talk. That's actually called interactive linguistic alignment. We facilitate things lots of ways by limiting the degrees of freedom in the way we express ourselves to resonate with others. It allows other people to get more fully into the conversation. This is all self-organizing with invariant techniques like turn-taking, language mirroring, complementarity, adjacency. Why is all this important for VR design? Just to sum up what I've been talking about so far, VR platform designers are obviously operating under the exact same set of factors that we all are as we negotiate the so-called real world, SCRW. The way our embodied and enacted cognitive system operates in the so-called real world shows us how to do it in VR. Also, the objectives are the same: shared presence. All of this cognitive scaffolding and offloading to the body and the environment has as its primary purpose to conserve resources for being present with someone else. It's not so much that we need to design for shared presence. Shared presence will happen. We need to design to remove the things that obstruct shared presence, like directing your attention on how to open the door, not on the collaborative task ahead or what it is you're talking about. And as I hope I'm about to show, shared presence can be felt in even the most reduced information environment you can imagine. And it's because you're so limited in what you can do that it becomes so easy to do that you don't have to think about it.